Hi, and welcome to the Simply Coaching Summit Reset. I am so excited that you are here to join me for this bonus session. Do you know that that means that you are digging in as a coach if you are joining me for this bonus session? Because it means that you maybe went ahead and already watched the live sessions and you wanted more, so you dove in and now you're coming for the bonus session. Well, I cannot wait for us to get going. This session is called Keeping Your Cool While Coaching. So I just want to introduce myself. I'm Allison Peterson. It is so nice to meet you. I am a K through 12 instructional coach at independent schools. And this is my sixth year out of the classroom coaching teachers. And the school I'm working at in Florida, this is my third independent school where I've been a coach. I've been the director of an instructional coaching program at my previous school where I led a team of 3 full-time coaches and 4 part-time teacher coaches, and that was a great experience. So I've been a coach and a coach of coaches. And then before that, I was a middle school English teacher for 8 years. I love middle schoolers and their sweet seventh grade hearts. I do have a heart for them. And I always found myself, though, when I was in the classroom, even though I loved what I was doing in the classroom, I found myself wanting to step out my door and help teachers. And so I always kind of had one foot out the door, trying to figure out how I could get across the hall to help that teacher or down the stairs to help that teacher. And it really was just a calling on my heart. I was drawn to the change and improvements that could be made if we worked on teaching, and I was able to share what I learned in the classroom. And I just really believe in supporting, training, and coaching teachers. So I am excited to share with you a little bit more about my journey while we're together here today. And I want to let you know that before we get started, make sure that you download the session guide that is available to you. It's something you can print out and follow along with. I've also linked for you the presentation slides so that you can get those for later and future reference. And then also, you should follow me on Instagram and Twitter. I would really love to connect with you further, even after this session, so that we can keep talking about this really important topic. And you'll find those links below as well. Can't wait to connect with you as we keep going. So let me share my screen and we'll go ahead and get started. So this session, Keeping Your Cool While Coaching, really came out of the work that I've done as a coach and the work that I've been able to do coaching other coaches. What I realized quickly when I started coaching is that instructional expertise was not really enough to get through my work with teachers. There's always questions or emotions that arose that hindered me from being able to really get to the real instructional work that needed to be done. And I realized quickly that I needed to learn to navigate that better when I worked with teachers. In this session, I'm going to share with you 4 practical steps to help you develop habits in response to teachers' emotions that can help you keep your cool while coaching. So, I'm going to share with you 4 practical steps that will help you handle emotional situations as a coach. And by the end of the session, you'll be able to create new habits that will help you keep your cool while coaching. We're going to talk about these 4 steps as a process for how you handle emotional situations when they come at you strongly or when you are literally faced with someone else's emotions right in front of you. So, the 4 steps, just as a quick preview here, are that you watch from the balcony, focus on listening, process and circle back, and find the runners. And I know from my own personal experience that these 4 steps will help you keep your cool while coaching in emotional situations. I've used them in my own coaching and I've helped other coaches use them in similar situations. And I've really just seen the fruit of this process. But before we get into that, I want to talk a little bit about you and who you are. So I know you. I know that you are a great classroom teacher. You are always prepared. You work so hard. You went above and beyond. Your students made great progress, and you could get students places that other people really couldn't. I know that about you because that's why you're a coach. You showed so much promise in the classroom that they wanted your energy to overflow into the other teachers in the school. So they came to you and they said, "Hey, we've got this opening. Would you like to coach? Would you like to come into this new role?" And at first you really just weren't sure. You didn't know if you want to leave the classroom. You love your students. You love your work, you are good at what you do. Yeah, I'm just not really sure at first. But at the same time, you knew that you could help teachers and you had a lot to offer, and you could ultimately impact more students if you were doing coaching. So you really wanted to affect that change in your district or in your school, and you were excited about the possibilities that it could bring. So, you said yes, but it probably wasn't long into your coaching that you realized that this was a little bit harder than you expected it to be, because coaching adults really isn't easy. It isn't as much like coaching students and teaching students as we thought. So, what works with students doesn't necessarily work with adults. And as you're trying to do this work, you're surprised by how often you're faced with resistance and high levels of emotions from teachers, because emotions run really high with adults, and resistance and change can be really strong sometimes. So we feel like all of a sudden everybody hates us and we've only been doing this job for a few months, or you're feeling angry a lot of the time because the teachers aren't doing what you have asked them to do, and you really don't understand that as a coach, because you would always do in your classroom what was best for students and you worked so hard to do that. And so you're always wondering, why don't these teachers just want to do what's best for students? I don't understand. They should just do it. It's really a confusing feeling. And that's what we're going to talk about today. 4 steps to keeping your cool. Those 4 steps will help you get past these strong emotions that you're being faced with and really help move towards the progress of what you wanted to see, why you came into the role in the first place. And I felt this way as a coach myself. It's really quite normal. And I've worked closely with other coaches who have experienced this. And what we find is that you have to really get past these emotions. And through a lot of trial and error, I figured out these 4 steps that we're going to talk about today, and they've worked for me, and I've seen change happen because of them. So I think that this approach can really work for you. But before we can get into the steps, you really need to know and understand why these emotions are so strong and where they're coming from. And really, it's not as it's kind of a surprise. So why are these emotions so strong, and where are they all coming from? Well, they're really coming from the brain. There's really a lot of brain science behind this resistance. Brains really don't like change. That's what the research says and how our brains work. They don't like change because they're wired to conserve energy and power. And that means they like to do things that are on autopilot. So brains prefer things that are easy because they don't have to work as hard. But change requires a lot of effort and energy. So the brain often resists that type of request when it's made. Many of the teachers we work with are being asked to change deeply embedded habits and beliefs, and they're really being faced with a big task of change. And we as coaches are the ones putting that in front of them, and they're becoming really overwhelmed. And this overwhelm in the brain, it's what really shows up as the emotional reaction on the outside. And so we can't really see what's happening in the brain, but we see the outward reaction, and we don't really know why there is so much emotions. And sometimes it shows up with yelling, sometimes it shows up with tons of anxiety and worry, sometimes it's tears. You just never know how it's going to show up with each person, but all of it is a brain reaction to the fact that they're being asked to change. And that is a core thing that if we believe that and understand it, it'll help us to coach better and understand our own emotions in all of it. So one of the best books that I've read on the brain and coaching is this book called Quiet Leadership by David Rock. It is so good, and it's well written, so it's not high level brain science, but it still explains to you all the brain science. So highly recommend it. It's not educational, it's more business world, but there's a lot to take away. If you're really serious about coaching, this is a great book. So he writes in it, bear in mind that our brain is a finely tuned machine dedicated to protecting the status quo, and trying new ways of thinking or behaving can send alarm bells ringing, even bringing on the fight or flight response, complete with an adrenaline rush. So when we're working with teachers, we really need to understand that people are responding to change as an instinctual reaction that is deeply rooted in their brains. And their reactions are not always resistance to what we're asking them to do. It's truly like a natural process of protecting themselves and trying to preserve their own energy. And often they're trying to process the change that's being asked of them. And even if we're asking them to make what we think is a small change, some brains may react strongly, and it really may take that person a lot more time to process change. So the truth is, though, we are agents of change. That is what we do in coaching. We want to help people grow, and ultimately that makes us agents of continual change. So if we're going to make change happen, then we're going to have to embrace people's emotions and reactions to change. And that's how we can help them move forward with the hard work of change. Keeping our cool is really the key to success, because if we keep level heads when we're faced with emotions, we can start to see the change we desire so badly. We can start to see that happening. But just because we're pushing change and receiving emotional reactions to change doesn't mean that we should stop pushing change or stop embracing people's emotions. It means instead that we need to lean in and help others process their emotions so that we can be catalysts of change. So, Brene Brown talks about this in her book, and it's a really great quote from her book, Dare to Lead. You should definitely look into this if you're more interested in learning more about how to process your emotions so that you can help other people with theirs. She does a great job of presenting this information. But she says that leaders must either invest a reasonable amount of time attending to fears and feelings, i.e., emotions, or squander an unreasonable amount of time trying to manage ineffective and unproductive behavior. And what that gets to is that if we don't take a minute to help people process their emotions, then we won't be able to help them get to the change that we want to see. So we're going to use the 4 steps that we're going to talk about today to see how we can help them do that. So the thing is that Daniel Goleman has done a lot of research on emotional intelligence, and he's revealed that people skills and emotional intelligence actually account for 80% or more of your success as a leader. And this is a really important realization for us as coaches, because what it means is that the instructional skills and teaching expertise that you got into this coaching position with aren't actually the skills that you need to be a successful coach. Your instructional expertise alone is not going to be enough to help others embrace change, which is really what you are trying to do as a coach. And honestly, we can't even get to the instructional improvements that we want to see until we can help people overcome their fears around change and the new instruction that they're being asked to embrace. So the more effective coach out of coach A and coach B here on this slide is actually the one who embraces emotions and has strategies in her back pocket to manage her own emotions and to help people process their emotions. So these skills that we're going to learn today in this session, they will elevate you as a coach above others who are simply relying on instructional expertise to move people forward and change, because that's not what moves people forward. So if you feel like you are right now relying on your instructional expertise, it's not going to be enough. It isn't to help people make change. So we've got to really hone in on the emotional intelligence side of things. And that's where we can use these 4 steps. So let's talk about it. Let's talk about the swirl. It's all of the emotions. We're going to call it the swirl. And I define the swirl as any kind of drama, stress, or negativity that hinders coaching or gets in the way of coaching being productive. The swirl, as we've just discovered, is really actually just people's brains and having a remote emotional reaction to change that is in those hard situations that they really don't want to face. Once you have this idea of the swirl in your mind and understand what's really going on behind the emotions, you're going to be able to see the swirl more clearly when it comes walking your way. And then you can identify it and you can respond to it using the 4 steps that we're going to work on today. So let's dig a little bit deeper into the swirl and make sure you understand what is a swirl and what is not a swirl. There's a key difference between swirling teachers and then some who are actually just kind of venting and processing out loud. When you're experiencing a swirl, you're experiencing venting strong emotions over and over again from the same teacher about the same thing. And the key difference is that there's no response to coaching and there's no efforts to change and solve the problem. There's just a whole lot of talking going on, or whining going on, or complaining going on, or all of the things. So that is when you have swirling, when things are going round and around and around and they never seem to land anywhere. you know that a teacher is caught in a swirl, even if she sometimes sounds like she's trying to change, if you don't see any productive change going on. On the other hand, you have some teachers who are processing with you. They're trying to think out loud with you, and then they are able to take action. They're willing to listen to some coaching or some advice, and then they turn around and they take action. They're trying to solve the problem. Even if it was a little bit negative on the front end, those teachers are just processing versus swirling. So you want to make sure you're kind of sure which one's which. So I want you to take a minute here to think about two teachers in your mind who you've had interactions with. One that you can identify as swirling, who really isn't getting to the point of change, and then one who you can identify as processing, so you can help tell the difference. So on your guide, you can write in their names and some notes there about what you see as the difference between those two teachers. So you can be thinking about the difference between swirling and processing while I'm telling you about the 4 steps that we're going to talk about. So the 4 steps are a process. So you're going to start with the first one and you're going to move all the way down. And that's how you're going to respond to this type of emotion when it comes your way. So the first one we're going to talk about is how we can watch from the balcony. And then we're going to talk about focus on listening, which is listen and note. We're going to talk about how we process and circle back, and then how we find the runners. And those are going to be our 4 tips for keeping our cool while coaching. And those are going to be steps that are going to help you get where you want to go. So step number 1 is to watch from the balcony. I want you to take a minute and imagine that you are on your favorite balcony. Close your eyes, see if you can find something. This is your favorite balcony that maybe is in a beautiful theater that you love, or maybe you went on an amazing trip and it has this amazing view. So many different things. In my mind, I have a beautiful balcony overlooking the beach where my husband and I had an opportunity to get away one weekend. And that is just a beautiful place. This is going to be your safe place. This is going to be that place that you kind of escape to when the emotions come on you really strong. Think of a tornado that's coming at you that you need to hide from. And when you're going to hide, you're going to run up to the balcony. You want to mentally walk yourself up to the balcony and watch a conversation unfold. If you are faced with an emotional swirl and it comes at you, you want to go up to that balcony and pretend that you are watching everything from afar on the stage happening in front of you. You're going to allow yourself to detach from those personal emotions of that person in front of you, and realize some really important things. You're going to remember that the person that is in front of you is having a fight or flight reaction to the change that's being asked of them. This is not someone who's upset with you or something that you've done. It's actually something that's going on in their brains that is going to try and resist the fact that they're being asked to change. And you can detach yourself emotionally from them while you let them share and process their thoughts out loud, because you know that they're not actually emotionally frustrated at you. Now, they might say something that makes it imply that they're mad at you, but what's really happening is that they are just trying to figure out how to get to do the least amount of work, because that's how their brain is happy, in their happy place. You are not responsible for other people's emotions. This is really, really important. And it's why you're allowed to go to the balcony. Once you're on the balcony, you can step away and realize that this is not my emotions. This is the other person's emotions. They are in front of me. They are swirling, and I need to take a deep breath and detach. You will still be listening. We'll talk about that part in a second. But it may be hard to embrace at first because but once you understand that source of their emotions, their emotional reaction to change, you can give them the freedom to be emotional and you don't have to engage with it. Remember that your urgency is not my emergency. I always love that one, because really sometimes coaching is a lot about taking on other people's urgency. So in regard to that, you just want to find ways to respond kindly to what is in front of you without engaging in the swirl or the negativity. And this is the hard part, because the instinct is to agree with them or to tell them that, oh, I know, me too. And if you can find a way to stay out of the negativity and out of the swirl, you will really get yourself in a better mindset to keep cool. You want to prepare a few responses, back pocket responses for how you are going to face these swirl moments. Wow, that sounds really hard. Do you think we can find a time where we can talk about that next week? Or is there anything positive we can find in the situation? Or are there any solutions you can think of? Just anything that's in your back pocket that can kind of move them towards the next step and away from the emotions. But at the same time, you don't want to coach into the emotional swirl when it's swirling. We're going to talk about when you coach into it. At this point, you just respond kindly. You have a quick response so you can get out of the conversation and allow the negativity to pass. What you really want to make sure you don't do is pull out your advice monster. We really need to keep that in the drawer. The ugly advice monster really can't be of any help right now because this person is in a swirl, which is a very high level of emotion, and they're not going to accept any advice from you right now. So don't give any. Um, do everything you can not to start giving advice. And then there will be a time and place for you to give advice and to coach into this person and lead them in the right direction. But this moment right here at the height of their swirl, it's really not the moment. So try hard not to give any advice and to keep your mouth shut. So take a minute on your guide and write these things down because they are going to be your reminders for this step one. Keep your cool, watch from the balcony, and don't engage in the swirl. So I'm going to give you just a minute to do that while you're thinking about it. Don't engage in the swirl is step one for how to be successful. Think about how you might use this when you're facing an emotional reaction from a teacher or a recent event where you were faced with some emotions and you might have needed to try this approach instead of a responding approach and allowing your own emotions to get in the way. So once you're ready, we're going to talk about step two, which is focus on listening. You're going to put yourself in a listening stance and really move away from giving advice, like we said, and get up on that balcony and stay there and just listen. Watch the performance happen in front of you. Um, so listen is the best thing. Listening is the best thing you can do to help keep your cool when the swirl comes. When you focus on listening, you'll actually free yourself from the need to respond or argue with the person in front of you. And that allows you to keep your emotions in check because you're not going to say anything. So your emotions can't come out of your mouth. So all you can do is listen. It helps you keep your cool. So you're not thinking about all the things you want to be saying, even though you probably still are. At least you're trying to keep them in your mind. And it will kind of free you from that frustration because you can take a listening stance knowing that you don't have to respond to whatever this is that's in front of you. You are just going to listen and you're going to show that person that you're listening. One of the things that really helps me is this quote from James, the brother of Jesus. And he says that you should be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to become angry. I like the rhythm of it because I like to repeat it in my head whenever I am trying to get on that balcony and get into a listening stance. And be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to become angry because there's really no reason to be angry if you don't have to respond and all you're doing is listening. You can, if you can get your head around these three phrases, you're going to be able to choose how you want to respond to people's emotions. And that will help you keep your cool in a really powerful way. So, quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to become angry. Put yourself in the listening stance and really allow yourself to not respond and instead to just listen to what's being said to you. So the goal is to stop yourself from talking. You want to be curious and genuinely interested in what they're saying and show that in your body language. You want to take the pressure off yourself to respond so that you are not going to engage in anything that's being said. You're just listening. If you ask a question, you want to ask a question that you're sure is going to prompt them to keep talking. Things like, tell me more about that, or let me repeat back to you what I heard you say, and see if they will continue talking so that you can continue listening. One really important piece of focusing on listening is taking notes. And I know most of you really walk around with a notebook already in your hands, so maybe it will be easy for you to just pull that out and write down some of the things that are being said. You want to tell the teacher that you're writing down these things, these concerns that she is having, so that you can help her solve it. It might have two immediate effects. Number one, it's going to let that teacher know that she is being heard because you are actively listening, and active listening includes writing things down. But it also helps them realize that you're writing down the things that she's saying. So she might consider that her negativity is too strong, and it might help her to back down just a little bit if you say to her, let me write down what you're saying so that I can think about this and help you. If you don't have the option to write in that immediate moment, maybe you got caught in the hallway or something like that, go back and write down as much as you can remember of the conversation as soon as possible, because you'll need that information for one of our next steps. I've used this strategy in a situation where I had a teacher verbally attacking me with his opinions about how his students will never succeed. And it was really difficult to engage in that emotional situation. And I had plenty of things I wanted to say in response to his rant. But rather than engage him, because I knew it was going to be useless to argue with him, I pulled out my notebook and I wrote down every single crazy, ridiculous comment that he made about his students. And this kept him talking, really, so that I could hear more about his thinking and his logic. And I had that on paper so that I could process it and really come back around later with kind of seeing if I could approach this again. And so even though I didn't really agree with his point of view, I had a better understanding of where he was coming from and why he felt the way that he did. And it really did give me a better in later to see how I could help him with what he was talking about. But writing everything down helped me to just note everything and not feel like I had to talk back. So now that we've had a chance to think about how we're going to step back on the balcony, and we're going to be really mindful of focusing on listening and taking notes while we're listening, we really need to consider where our hearts and our hands are with this as you're engaging in the swirl. If someone is coming to you and they're swirling, you want to know how you're going to handle that. So there's actually some research on the idea of conflict and how you can't really engage in conflict and frustration if your hands are open. So it's a quick little trick to sit with your hands open in your lap, or if you're taking notes, one hand open, so that you can stop yourself from being frustrated when these kinds of conversations happen. So keeping your hands open is actually really a key way to keep your mind open to what's being said to you. Because even in really emotional situations, there still might be some good things that you can take from it, especially if you take a listening stance and you start taking notes. Those open hands and open heart and open mind will help you to really see if there's something you can do to support this teacher. When Timothy is working with churches in the Bible, Paul writes him this letter, and he tells him this truth, and it is something that I hold to very strongly. It means a lot to me, and I go back to it a lot because it helps me remember that I'm not the one who is doing the changing of people. So Paul writes, gently instruct those who oppose the truth. Perhaps God will change those people's hearts and they will learn the truth. And it's easier for me to have my hands open and my mind open and my heart open when I remember that it's actually not my job to change people's hearts. It's God's job. So in that way, you really are freed up to listen and support and help coach, but know that really you can't change a person. Only God can change somebody in their heart and mind by renewing their heart and mind. So it leaves you with a lot of freedom when you can put that stance, that listening stance on. So as we wrap up step 2, I want you to take some notes on your session guide about how you're going to keep your cool while coaching. You're going to focus on listening. You're going to do it with an open heart and open mind, and you might be taking some notes as well. So there's a couple of ways there for you that you can take some notes on before we move on to step 3. So step 3 is process and circle back. And again, these steps happen in order. So you are faced with a swirl. You start by listening to someone, but being detached by watching in the balcony, listening with a lot of intentional thinking, and then taking notes while you're listening. And now you're going to work on processing and circling back. And one of the things you need to do to end that conversation when they come to you with a swirl is be sure to ask for another meeting. Get a way in again when the emotions are not running as high. So you can say something like, thank you for sharing your thoughts with me. It's very insightful and helpful to know what you've been thinking about. Let me have some time to think about this and I'll get back to you. When are you available to meet next week? Let me talk to so-and-so about this and see if I can get some more information. Find a way to show that you are going to actively do something in response to their emotions, but you are also going to have to come back later to talk about this again, not necessarily be able to solve their problem right away, which is usually what they want you to do. So when you do this, when you step away from this conversation, you need to process your own emotions first. You need to kind of get real with yourself and think about where you are, where your heart is with this person and what has just happened and all of those things. So usually writing is a good way to do that. Just thinking about what happened, processing your emotions, rereading those notes and seeing what you find there and what's in your heart. And just remember that if you are feeling angry and frustrated, then you really need to be introspective about why you're feeling angry and frustrated, because you need to try to establish the reason behind your own emotions so that you can move past those, so that you can think about helping the person across from you. So then another thing you want to do is identify the real concern. There is a Disney blog about this idea of the cast members often are asked the question at Disney right before the parade, what time does the 3 o'clock parade start? Wait, what? What kind of question is that? What time does the 3 o'clock parade start? The question just answered the question. And so instead of answering the question with the blunt answer, which is, well, of course it starts at 3 o'clock, the cast members are encouraged to remember that they really aren't asking what time the parade starts. They're really asking things like, where can I see it best? When does it come right here? When does it come where we're standing? Who am I going to see on the parade? So to actually realize that even though there is one question being asked out of their mouth, the real question is actually hiding underneath. So we like to use this as a little, what's the 3 o'clock question prompt, where you really start thinking about the real concerns. Often what people bring to you on the surface is not really the concern, which is another reason why we have to understand the brain and how the brain works behind the scenes. So as you're thinking about the real concern, you can ask these questions as you're processing through what happened. So is the emotion in front of you really the response to the emotion, the thing that was brought up, the actual issue? Are there other underlying issues? What is the obvious answer that this person is avoiding? As a coach, it's very important to know the answer to that question, because you're going to have to coach them towards the obvious answer and they don't want to go there. So it's good to identify that. What's the real reason for their emotions? Is there anything personal going on that may be causing these emotions to run high? Sometimes you don't know what's going on in somebody's personal life, but if you can dig a little bit deeper, when you're doing your own reflecting and processing, you might find where some of these underlying issues are. And that will help you to do the next piece of this process and circle back step, which is circle back. You can't leave an emotional situation and an emotional encounter just to be left. You can't leave it. You have to find a way to circle back. And one of the things you'll do when you circle back is re-engage and see if you can help get this person to a place where they're willing to change. So when you're circling back, you want to think about how you're going to prompt them with questions to see if they can get to their own solution. This is a really important piece of coaching. If you haven't really landed on this yet, then you may still be in the place where you're in the training mindset, where you're trying to train somebody to do it the way that they're expected to do it. Coaching is not about training. It's actually about questioning and getting them to do their own thinking. And that means that you've got to be ready to prompt them with questions. And they're not like leading questions that are like, hey, where do you think we should go with this? No, they're questions that really allow that person to do the deep thinking. And all you are doing is being the catalyst for change by asking the questions. You want to If you feel like you need to, you can offer some clear solutions that are small and have manageable steps. And again, that helps with that brain overload that we know that emotional people are probably experiencing right now. The smaller the steps, the better. When you think the step is small, step backwards one more step and make it even smaller. Because honestly, usually as coaches, we're pretty fast moving and we get things pretty quickly. And you have to remember that not everybody can work at your pace. I have to remember that all the time. So you want to gauge their willingness to change and their emotional response to change. Remember, to get out of the swirl, they have to accept that they need to change and then start making changes. Small changes are acceptable, but changes have to happen. So you want to start to gauge whether or not they're coming out of the swirl or if they're staying in the swirl, and you need to disengage again, process, and circle back again until you've gotten to a place where they are really starting to make the change that you're hoping to see. So let's do a quick recap for our steps at this point. Make sure you're looking at your session guide and you can take some more notes. So our step 1 is to head up to that balcony, stay a little detached emotionally, watch everything from above, and let it play out in front of you. And then step 2 is focus on listening. Make sure that you are doing a lot of listening with your open heart and open mind. Take good notes, because step 3 is process and circle back. And you're going to want to process yourself and your own emotions internally first. And then you can start to process the emotions of the person that you have engaged with in their swirl, and see if you can start to find some ways that you can prompt them in their questioning. You need to take your time on your process and circle back. You do not have to go back the very next day. You can wait a week even. You can give it time, especially if it's an extremely highly emotional situation. So take some notes on this step, keep your cool, take your time, process, and circle back. Our last step is step number 4. This one is my favorite, I must say, and it is find the runners. You are going to love this because it gives you so much permission, and it's very exciting when you start to find and identify your runners. So this idea comes from Ron Clark and his book, Move Your Bus. You have to get this book. It is so good. Ron Clark is amazing. He started a school in Atlanta for middle school kids, and he's done such great work. If you haven't heard of him, you really need to Google Ron Clark Academy. So who's on your bus is what he talks about in this book. He says, imagine that you have a bus and the engine is the feet of the people in your organization. And the only way that it can move forward is if everyone is moving the bus through their feet. So you have on the bus these different people. You have your runners, your joggers, your walkers, your riders, and your driver. So your runners are the people who are in your organization, who are working the hardest, who are going above and beyond, who are always trying to do the next thing and get better. They are the ones who are just pushing and pushing, and they're always just doing everything at extremely high level. And your joggers are close behind those runners, but they're not always giving the same amount of effort that a runner gives. A runner gives so much effort that they probably don't stop enough to breathe. A jogger is good. They give good enough effort. They make good progress, but they don't really reach that high level of the runners. A walker is somebody who is contributing but not really moving very fast. They might be doing some good things, but they're really not doing anything that's moving them forward. It just kind of keeps them staying in place. And the riders are the ones who aren't helping move the organization or the bus towards a goal at all. So when you think about the bus and the end destination, you think about the goal that maybe you're working towards in student learning. Let's say we talk about literacy improvement, right? So each teacher can be a different type of person on the bus, and how they're contributing towards that bigger goal. And your driver is your leader, the person who is leading them forward. So in some cases, that's the principal, but in a lot of cases, that's you as the coach who is partnering with these people to help them continue to move forward. So in the book, Ron Clark gives this amazing example of how hard he worked with this teacher that he was trying to support, and she was a rider. And he worked with her and he worked with her and he worked with her and he poured all this time into her. And at the end of the day, all she really did, if she did anything versus all of his efforts, was just put her feet down and start becoming a walker. So the bus overall didn't really start moving that much faster. And he had poured all his energy and time into those people, into that woman who is a rider. And instead of helping the bus move more or move faster or get where we're going, it really just kind of gave a small emphasized, push. But he also talks about how if you pour into the runners, if you pour into the strong teachers who are working so hard, who are doing everything well, who are always willing to grow, if you're the one who's pouring into them, it only takes a little bit of pouring into them, of encouraging them, of letting them know they're doing a great job, of giving them a resource or taking them to a PD. Just a little bit of encouragement for a runner will help fuel them to run so much more and so much faster towards the goal. So ultimately, your bus is going to move faster if your runners keep running and if your runners keep running fast. And that's actually how you start to move your organization and change it. That's what he talks about in the book. It's so great. But you start to equate it to your school and you start looking at the people who is around you and who you're coaching, you might want to start thinking about this framework, because if you are focusing on the riders, possibly the ones who are swirling all the time and who never back away and who are just always swirling and never changing, those are probably your riders and your walkers. And if you spend so much time outpouring into them, you're only going to get their feet down on the ground. But if you move your emphasis to working with the runners, if you pour your time and energy into them, you are going to get a much bigger payoff in the end. And you are really going to see a huge blow up of progress that's going to help you feel energized and excited about the work you're doing, because the progress is going to be so clear and evident. And so once I did this, I read this book, and then I had some other things that informed my thinking, and I started working towards working with my runners. I felt like I was really moving forward and making progress as a coach. And those teachers, they were so thankful for the support and help. And often we think that our runners are not in need of any help because they are so great, and so they don't need any help. They just are always going to do it without you. They are actually the ones who are craving a little more feedback, a little more support, one more resource. Can you meet with me about this? They're the ones who want to meet with you. And you're like, yeah, I want to meet with you too. So really find a way to focus yourself on the runners. Find them and focus on them. Now, if you're being asked by a principal to work with somebody who you would consider to be a rider, it's not that you shouldn't work with them. It's really not. It's just that you should realize that your efforts towards the runners are going to move everything forward. So if you're working with some walkers and some riders, that's possible, typical. You need to make sure that you're also pouring back into those runners, because they're the ones who are going to help you be energized and ultimately they're the ones who are going to move the goal and move everything forward. So that's really, really important. Another piece of this is the partnering. So if you actually, start coaching this person and you partner with them, you're going to have that progress, and you're going to be able to report that back to your principal too and say, well, even though I'm not making great progress with blank because he's a rider, I am making great progress with this runner, and he's really making good progress, and we're seeing this change. So you can show the difference in progress as well as you're trying to kind of report those things back. Also, working with the runners is a way for you to kind of set some boundaries around these swirlers and these riders who are holding things back. You want to go and re-engage with them, with the emotional people, if an opening presents itself. But the truth is if they don't respond and they're not making changes, and you're not feeling like they are really, coming out of their emotional swirl towards change, then you really can set boundaries. You're allowed to set those boundaries and stop working with that person so that you can go work with a runner instead. And that allows you to really have permission to focus where you're going to be able to make an impact. You circle back and you process and you circle back. Every time you see that swirler, you go back, you circle back. But if you continue to see swirling and you continue not to see change, you continue to report that to your principal, not necessarily the details, but you need to say things like, I have worked with this person multiple times and I have not seen them make any changes. I am continuing to work with this person, but they're not making any changes. And so that you can show them in contrast to the runners and how the runners are making changes, and how one small little change that a runner makes is going to help them just take off and make big impact on the literacy improvement that you're trying to do. So as we wrap up our 4 steps, I really want to encourage you to keep your cool, by focusing on progress and finding your runners. People are going to help you keep your energy up when there are some emotional things happening around you, and they're going to help you keep energy, and you're going to help them keep energy, because they will really be energized by the support and help that you can give them as a coach, and they are going to just love having you around. That's really what a runner wants, and if you ever find a runner but you're kind of intimidated by a runner, that happens sometimes. Remember that they desire feedback. They may be have a little bit trouble being vulnerable, but they really do desire feedback. So find a way to start working with the runners, even if they are kind of to you as well, because they are the ones who are going to really benefit from your help and support. So our 4 steps to really help you keep your cool while coaching, as a quick recap, is for you to head up to that balcony and watch from the top, detach yourself emotionally, focus on listening, and listen in that listening stance with an open heart and an open mind. Take some notes, because you're going to need to process and circle back around with that teacher and see if you can make an impact when you do, to see if you can move them out of this whirl and towards change. And then while you're doing all of that, make sure you go find a runner. Go find somebody that is going to give you energy and that you are going to be able to give energy to, who is going to give ultimately energy to the whole organization because of who you're pouring into. So all of those things will really help you to keep your cool, and to really help you stay balanced while you're faced with some heavy emotional pieces. So I want to share with you a couple of books that you may want to consider reading, that are on this particular topic of keeping your cool and emotional, keeping some emotional intelligence in mind while you are coaching. So Dare to Lead is Brene Brown's book, and it is going to challenge you. If you choose to read it, it's going to challenge you about being vulnerable and walking into what she calls rumbles, which are hard conversations with people. And I do think that her approach to rumbles is a lot about what we've been talking about today. So you will probably get a lot out of Brene Brown's book. Quiet Leadership, I mentioned before, is really about the brain science of coaching. It is super powerful and helps you understand a lot about why coaching works and what works about coaching. Jim Knight wrote Better Conversations. It is, I believe, one of his best books about coaching, and it is all about this idea of how you have core foundational beliefs and then you work in them. And one of them is listen with empathy. So definitely tied to what we talked about today. And then Elena Aguilar wrote Onward, which is cultivating emotional resilience in educators. And even though this book is kind of aimed towards the teacher, there are a lot of different snippets that she intentionally builds in for instructional coaches and leaders, because she is an instructional coach herself. If you don't follow her, you should find her too, her and Jim Knight. So I wanted to also let you know that in the spring, I'm going to be launching a #new to coaching online course that will be available, and it will cover these topics in even more detail than we talked about today. And it'll also be really diving into some deep work about understanding who you are as a coach and establishing your beliefs and behaviors, developing self-awareness as a coach, keeping your cool while coaching, and then tips for new coaches. So I'm working on that course, and I would really love to have you be a part of it. I'd be really excited about really continuing to work with you on developing your skills as a coach, especially when it comes to emotional intelligence. So sign up below. There's a link below for you to sign up for my newsletter, which will put you on the email list so that when it goes live, you'll be the first to know. I just want to say thank you again so much for joining me in this session, Keeping Your Cool While Coaching. Again, you can download the session guide. You can download the slides that will be available for you, and you can stay in touch with me, because I would love to connect with you and continue to talk with you about this really tough subject. It's a great subject, and it continues to be something that we work on as coaches every day. So happy 2020, friends.